This movie saved the slasher genre. Hell, it saved the horror genre. Is that an overreaction? Well, no. Believe it or not, it's not. In the 90s, horror films in general were in a bad place. Films like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween had just been spammed to death with shitty sequels, and horror movies in general were turning more toward direct-to-DVD rather than going into theaters. The genre needed an injection of something new to make it fresh again, and that injection came in the form of Kevin Williamson, Nightmare on Elm Street creator Wes Craven, and the new film Scream. So how did Scream reinvent the slasher genre? Well, simple, by shitting all over it. That's right, this wasn't any normal slasher film, this was a black comedy slasher film. This movie openly mocked the entire horror genre and all the cliches that came with it, while at the same time creating an incredible murder mystery movie. This movie also changed how casting in horror movies was done as well, as they actually cast well-known actors like Drew Barrymore and Courtney Cox. Before in horror movies, it had just become custom to cast new actors and actresses and hope you can get lucky, but I mean, it was kind of a dime a dozen. Not everybody can be Jamie Lee Curtis. This movie did establish some careers though, as it helped bring up Rose McGowan, Matthew Lillard, Neve Campbell, and David Arquette. This movie also made a lot of fucking money. $173 million to be exact, and it was the highest grossing slasher film for 22 years until Halloween 2018 made $255 million. But what is this movie really about? Well, the movie centers around a high school student named Sydney Prescott who's dealing with her mother's death and trying to avoid a mass killer that attempts to get her at every turn. Can Sydney discover who this killer really is and, more importantly, survive this movie? Well, we're about to find out as we take a look back at Scream, 1996. So the movie starts with a high school student named Casey Becker who's home alone for the evening about to watch a horror movie. She gets a couple of mysterious phone calls though from a voice she doesn't recognize. And the calls are actually borderline flirty at first as he teases maybe wanting to ask her out on a date and they discuss their favorite horror movies. It quickly turns a little bit different though as the person over the phone reveals that he's watching her. Casey starts to understandably freak the fuck out and the caller becomes increasingly incensed when she keeps hanging up on him. Casey's got a backup plan though, her big strong boyfriend who's gonna beat the caller up, and oh hey, there he is, hey Steve, he's tied to a chair. The killer tells Casey that Steve will survive as long as she answers some movie trivia correctly. He asks her who the killer was in Friday the 13th and she immediately answers Jason. Unfortunately she was wrong though, as Jason was not the killer in the first Friday the 13th, but we'll discuss that more in October. As a result of this, Steve has a mysterious accident which results in his entrails spilling all over the floor. Clumsy bastard. The caller also asks Casey what door he's gonna come through. She doesn't know, but she finds out pretty quick. Casey grabs a knife and escapes outside, but she notices her parents finally coming home. She then comes face to face with the killer, but she knocks him down and runs off into the yard, and now she's safe. Oh shit. Yeah, it turns out she's not so safe at all, unless your definition of safe is taking a knife in your shoulder. She kicks the dude right in the dick though and is able to crawl to her porch. Unfortunately, she pulls a Laurie Strode in Halloween 2 and loses her voice before she can call her parents for help. The killer gets on top of her and she takes off the mask to reveal who it is. We don't get to see though, and she won't be able to tell us as he kills her. Her parents meanwhile find the house ransacked and begin freaking out, wondering where their kid is. They don't have to look far though, as Casey's there all along. See? She's just hanging out. Now that is how you start a fucking horror film. We're then quickly introduced to Sydney Prescott and her jump scare boyfriend Billy. We're also briefly introduced to Sydney's dad Neil, who's going away on a business trip for the weekend. Sydney then makes out with Billy a little bit, but he gets a little bit too handsy and she's not ready for that, so she sends him away. Back out the window you go. The next day at school, Sydney meets up with her friend Tatum and they discover that the media and police have descended on the school due to the murders that took place last night. All the students, including Sydney, are also being interviewed by Principal Fonzie, Sheriff Burke, and Deputy Dewey Riley, who is also Tatum's older brother. We're also introduced to Tatum's boyfriend Stu and their weird-ass friend Randy, and they all discuss the murders that have been going on. Sydney's not one for this murder talk though, as it makes her incredibly uncomfortable. The reason it makes her uncomfortable is the last person in this town that was murdered was her mother, 1 year ago. Sydney tries to de-stress from this by taking a nap. When she wakes up later, she gets a call from Tatum, who's on her way to pick her up. She then gets a second phone call though from a mysterious voice who claims to be watching her from her balcony. She goes out there and checks and she's like, no you're not, there's nobody watching me. Oh god, he was in the closet. The killer chases Sydney throughout the house and into her room where she uses a computer to dial 911. When she looks back at the door, turns out he's fled. But here comes jump scare Billy for the window again to save the day. Or maybe maybe not, as a wireless cell phone falls out of his pocket. Suspecting that it was him, Sydney runs away, calls the police, and has Billy arrested. Annoying-ass news reporter Gail Wevers and her cameraman Kevin have also descended on the scene, but Sydney declines to comment. Billy is interrogated at the police station meanwhile by the sheriff, who claims he's gonna hold him overnight while they scan his telephone records. Sydney, who is also at the police station, goes home with Dewey and Tatum, but Gail catches up to them. But hey, it looks like Sydney's changed her tone. She wants to do an interview. Oh my god, Falcon Punch! Well, hopefully Sydney can have herself a quiet night now. Just kidding. She gets another threatening phone call from the killer. Looks like the police got the wrong man. The next day, Sydney decides to confront Gail again outside her school, but maybe with a little less violence this time. Sydney's beef with Gail is that Gail basically profited off her mother's tragedy by writing a book about it. And Gail's beef with Sydney is that she believes Cotton Weary, the man that Sydney identified as the man who murdered her mother, to be innocent, and that Sydney put an innocent man in prison. Sydney tries to shake this off, but you can tell she's beginning to question whether she did the right thing or not. So inside the school, after an asshole in a ghost face mask runs down the hallway, Sydney reunites with Billy, who is released from jail. Billy, who is sexually frustrated, basically tells Sydney, "Bro, your mom's been dead for a year, just get over it, lol." And obviously this doesn't go over well with Sydney. Meanwhile, the Fonz is fucking pissed at these assholes playing pranks in the Ghostface mask, and he promptly expels them both. Speaking of awful children, Sydney hides in the bathroom while some bitchy cheerleader lambasts her and her mother, and basically accuses Sydney of being the murderer. Man, high school kids fucking suck. Turns out they weren't the only one in the bathroom though, as oh, guess who's here? Better run fast, Sydney. Meanwhile, outside the school, Gail flirts with Deputy Dewey. Fun fact, David Arquette and Courtney Cox met on the set of this movie and ended up getting married 4 years later. As a result of the copycat douchebags though, school has been cancelled until further notice, which prompts Stu to use this opportunity to throw a big party. Meanwhile, somebody knocked on the principal's door and he's not sure who it is. The only other person he sees is the janitor, Freddy, who's played by Wes Craven. Get it, Freddy? Because he's just like Freddy, and it's Wes Craven, he invented Nightmare Now. Okay, anyway, the principal's like, who the hell's in my office? Oh, you know who's in his office, and he gets brutally murdered. Later that day, Sydney continues to second guess her decisions, but Tatum convinces her to focus on the party instead. Looks like there's someone focused on them instead as well, though. We then get maybe the funniest scene in the whole movie where Stu and Randy are in a Blockbuster discovering horror movies and how it connects to what's going on, and Randy thinks Billy is the killer, and he starts getting way too into it because he's way too into horror movies and starts screaming at the top of his lungs. Turns out Billy's in there too, and he doesn't take too kind to it though, which just makes Randy even more suspicious of him. So meanwhile, the entire town is turned in because of a newly implemented curfew, and Dewey learns from the sheriff that the phone calls made to Sydney were traced back to her dad, Neil Prescott. But screw it, I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Time for a big-ass house party. Sydney's just trying to relax, but that doesn't last long as Gail shows up uninvited and plants a camera inside the house. Meanwhile, disposable horror movie character Tatum has gone into the garage to get some beers. She, of course, does not hear the door close behind her, and when she turns around, there is Ghostface. She thinks it's a joke at first, until he attacks her. She's able to fight back though and tries to escape through the cat door in the garage. This proves to be a major mistake though, as Ghostface lets the garage door go up, crushing her head at the top. Meanwhile, a lot of the guests have started to go home, but here's Billy. Gail and Kevin, meanwhile, are watching on their camera feed of the house, but turns out the feed has maybe around a 30-second delay, which will come into play later. Sydney and Billy, meanwhile, have a heart-to-heart conversation upstairs, and Sydney decides to let go of her fears and finally have sex with Billy. Meanwhile, the rest of the teens are downstairs watching Halloween, and Randy decides to explain the rules of surviving a horror movie. Never have sex, never do drugs or alcohol, and never say I'll be right back, because you won't be right back. I want to interject with something real quick though, because he uses Laurie Strode as an example, and I forgot to talk about this in the Halloween look back. Why does everyone try to use that example with Laurie? It's like, oh, she survived because she's pure and she doesn't do drugs and shit like that. Yeah, she did. There's literally a 2-minute scene in Halloween of her and her friend smoking weed in the car. Why is everyone trying to pretend like that doesn't exist? Because it does. Here it is. Meanwhile, Dewey invites Gail to go on a walk with him to an abandoned car, while Randy gets a phone call telling him that the principal's been murdered. And the other kids are like, oh sweet, the principal's been murdered, let's go check out the body. And they leave to go do that because it's the 90s and apparently everybody is awful. Dewey and Gail nearly get run over by these overzealous teens, which indirectly leads them to the car they were looking for, which they find to be the car of Neil Prescott. Sydney and Billy, meanwhile, have just had sex, but it seems that even now, Sydney is somewhat still suspicious of Billy. Billy's about fed up with this shit, and he's like, what can I do to convince you that I'm not the killer? Well, how about getting killed? Shabam! Ghostface chases Sydney once again for another house, and she's able to escape into the attic. She's able to climb out the window, but Ghostface pushes her off the balcony, but luckily, she lands right onto a covered boat. This also, though, leads her to discovering Tatum's body. I swear the funniest scenes in this movie involve Randy, and here's another one. He's on the couch watching Halloween, and he's like, Lori, turn around, he's right behind you, right as Ghostface is right behind him about to stab him, but before he can, he hears Sydney screaming. Sydney escapes into the van with Kenny, and they watch the footage on a monitor. Kenny goes to get help, but then he realizes that it's on delay, and he promptly gets his throat slit. Sydney runs away right as Dewey and Gail come back. Dewey investigates the house, while Gail gets on the phone to call for help. She gets jump scared by Randy, though, and promptly beats him over the head with the phone multiple times. Also, why can't she see out her windshield? Oh, probably because of all of Kenny's blood. Oh hey, there's Kenny. She tries to flee in the van, but Sydney jumps out in front of her, which causes her to swerve off the road and go right into a tree. Sydney then finds Dewey coming out of the house sporting the fancy new knife in the back look. Looks good on you. She locks herself in Dewey's car to try to escape Ghostface, but turns out he has the keys and comes in for the trunk. She's able to get away once again and grabs Dewey's gun right as Stu and Randy both pull up. They each accuse each other of being the killer, and Sydney literally says fuck the both of you before locking them out of the house. But hey, look at that, Billy's still alive, and oh, falling down the stairs cannot be good for your condition, bud. Sydney gives Billy the gun and he opens the door to let Randy in. His mood changes real quick though, and he shoots Randy right in the shoulder. Stu shows up as well, and here comes the big twist. Dun dun dun! Turns out there were two killers the entire time. Billy and Stu lay it all out for Sydney that they were actually the ones that murdered Sydney's mom a year ago because Sydney's mom had sex with Billy's dad, which caused Billy's mom to leave the family, and now he's doing this as revenge. Turns out they're both just complete psychopaths. Well, Billy is at least. Stu might just be an idiot, but their plan is to craft the perfect horror movie, and a perfect ending for them will be them both surviving. And hey, there's Sydney's dad. They had him locked up in the closet, and their plan is to stab Sydney to death, shoot her dad, and then they both come away the heroes as survivors. In order to do that though, they have to have literal stab wounds, so they quite literally stab each other multiple times. Yeah, they're both pretty much psychopaths. There's one problem with their plan though. Stu lost a gun. A gun just doesn't get up and leave though, so where'd it go? Oh hey Gail, there you are, you found the gun. Unfortunately, Gail doesn't really know how to use it, or take the safety off for that matter, and Billy just pretty much kicks her ass and knocks her out. More shit's going wrong for them though as they come back in the kitchen and notice that both Sydney and her dad are gone. And Billy gets a phone call from Sydney with a voice changer, and turns out she's playing Ghostface now. Billy starts to freak out while Stu starts to bleed out, and Billy begins to search for Sydney. He doesn't have to look long though as Sydney pulls a Michael Myers and comes out of the closet, stabbing him twice with a freaking umbrella. Looks like Stu's gotten a major second wind energy though, and he charges right at Sydney. They wrestle around for a bit until Sydney hits him over the head with a vase, and then throws a television onto his head, promptly crushing and electrocuting him. Hey look, Randy's still alive, but oh shit, so is Billy, and oh hey Gail, you figured out how to use the gun. Good for you. And then, as Randy correctly predicts, Billy pops up for one more jump scare before Sydney shoots him right in the head. The movie ends with Dewey, who's still alive, being loaded into an ambulance, and Gail doing an impromptu news report outside of the house. So I've talked nothing about the positive aspects of this movie so far, but there is one thing on the other end of the spectrum I want to bring up real quick. While yes, injecting more humor into horror movies was a good idea and something the slasher genre definitely needed, it did become annoying in some horror franchises who tried to replicate it and didn't have as funny as actors, and it just kind of made some franchises as a whole more annoying. See Bride of Chucky for an example of this, which now that I think about it, might be the first time I've ever recommended anybody watch Bride of Chucky. So you might be thinking then, well, this movie definitely got sequels, right? Oh, you bet your ass it got sequels. It got 3, soon to be 4 sequels. And pretty soon here, I don't know when, but sometime soon, we'll take a look back at Scream 2, which is actually arguably on par with this one. And with the exception of today, this is being released on the special day of Monday, these usually come out every Saturday. And luckily for us, there are 5 Saturdays in the month of October. So in October, we are going to be doing exclusively horror movies. Later this week though, for the last Saturday of September, we're going to be taking a quick break from horror movies as we quickly go back to King Kong with our King Kong look back at King Kong 1976. But in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, this movie was just a definition of fresh air. Here's a fun test for you. Go watch the original Halloween, original Nightmare, original Friday the 13th, original Texas Chainsaw. They're all great, right? But then watch some of the shitty sequels, right? Watch, I don't know, Halloween 5 and 6. Watch Friday 5. Watch Nightmare whatever. Chainsaw whatever. And you'll see like, oh man, this just got really spammy. But then after you've watched all those shitty sequels, watch Scream, and you're like, oh man, thank God this movie was made. And again, there was a reason why this was the highest grossing slasher film for 22 years. Hell, this franchise is still going. Scream 5 is coming out in 2022 in January. Unfortunately, this will be the first film without Wes Craven, who passed away in 2015. Rest in peace, Wes Craven, and thank you for making this movie. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for my first Scream look back at Scream. Again, we will be back this Saturday on a normal day of Saturday with King Kong in 1976. All horror movies in October, but that is going to do it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to all 53 of my patrons who are named in the description for supporting me and both my channels. All my other social media links are in the channel as well. With all that being said though, my name is Taffordstein. This has been my look back at Scream 1966, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.